Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon where you are. I'm going to start with a prayer for Lord Ganesha, since we had a celebration for him just recently. Shuklam Bharadaram Vishnum Shashivarnam Chaturbhujam Prasannavadanam Dhyayet Sarva Vigna Prashanti. Prayers to the Guru. Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha, Dhyana Moolam Guru Murti, Puja Moolam Guru Padam, Mantra Moolam Guru Vakyam, Moksha Moolam Guru Kripa, Ajnanaatimirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I bow down to Supreme Almighty God. I bow down to saints, sages of all places, of all times, of all religions. I bow down to our beautiful lineage of Kriya Yoga masters. In particular, my Guru Paramahamsa Hariharananda, my Guruji Paramahamsa Prajnanandaji. I bow down to the divinity within each one of you. Thank you. Jai Guru. So, today, I'll be talking about steps for self-realization. But before I begin that talk, we need to understand, this process of creation itself. How did we come into being to, in order to get self-realized? A good analogy to start with is to understand the laws of physics. How are the celestial bodies, are in motion, for example, Earth around the sun, and how are they in balance with respect to the multiple forces that's going on? There's a gravitational pull, for example, for Earth from the sun and from other planets. However, that gravitational pull is balanced by the centrifugal force because Earth is going around the sun. So there is a balance that is established that comes into being so that these Earth and other celestial bodies are basically in a perfectly balanced state, and they are performing their aspect of rotation around the sun or whatever other rotations they are doing, for example, around their own axis. Now, coming to creation, Paramahamsa Yoganji explains that the creation is a repulsive force that came from God. Essentially, that God wanted to create, and so he did this creation. So he had this, essentially provided this repulsive force to move both, the beings as well as, the world of matter, essentially, away from himself. However, he instilled in that creation the force to come back to him. So there is that, you can say, attraction or gravitational pull that he gave, that every creation, it is all matter, for that matter, including the beings like us, they are being pulled back to God as well. So there is the repulsive force, which he created a a delusive reality, a reality that we seem to understand and believe in. And we think it is real at the same time, but it's a delusion. So this delusive reality called Maya, he created that. And that Maya, force of Maya is pulling us away from God, while God has instilled within us the force to pull back. So there is a balance that is going to, that happens between. So each human being finds his or her own balance in this, realm of creation, where the pull of the Maya away from God and the pull of God is balanced, and the person is at that particular state. Now, unlike the heavenly bodies or celestial bodies like Earth, the human beings are not always, this balance that they have is not always necessarily permanent. It depends upon events and situations that arise in one's life that could alter this balance. So one could, go away because there's a free will given by God for us. And that free will allows us to move away from God or move towards God. So it's possible that one has a situation that essentially leads one away from God. However, eventually the person will have to come back to God. That pull of God is never gone because we are made in the image of God. And so that pull of God eventually will bring back this person. But that could take a long time. The involuntary process, Yoganji explains that this process could take a long time, millions of years, for example. So a discriminative being, decides, well, why should I wait for millions of years? First of all, God created me without my permission. So why should I wait for millions of years to return back to God? He's the creator. He is my father. Why not I return back to God? And so he basically turns around and makes the effort to return to God. And that is when the voluntary action starts and the person starts to move towards God. Now, this process, of course, again, there are stumbling blocks along the way. So we need help of, the directions from masters in order to realize that journey back so that we are not stuck at any particular point. And so in this aspect, in fact, one of the things that Yoganji points out is that we don't have to, we are already realized. It's not like that we have to, do something to realize. It's just that we have forgotten it. We basically have to get that awareness so that we realize that we are actually already realized. It's just that we are always been with God. It's just that we have been subject to this delusive reality called Maya, and we have been moved away from that. So as a result, in fact, a good analogy for that is the musk deer. The musk deer is, has this perfume and is looking for this perfume everywhere. And in fact, it may even fall to its death from the craggy peaks of mountains looking for that smell, when in fact it is right in its own pouch. So it is the same situation with us. That realization is already our birthright. It's already given to us. It's just that we don't realize that, we are actually realize we are one with God. We need the awareness, awakening, you can say, in order to realize that reality. So we need some help in order to get to that point of realization. And there are some things that we have to do in order to get there. So these are the steps towards self-realization that Adi Shankara talks about in his Sadhana Panchakam. Sadhana Panchakam is basically 5 verses of practice. Each verse has 4 lines, and each line has 2 instructions. So it is a total of 40 instructions in total. So let's start. I may not be able to complete all the 5 verses in this particular lecture, but let me start with the first verse number 1. And I'll explain, the first 2 lines of the verse number 1. The verse 1 goes like this: Vedo nityamadhiyatam, taduditam karma svanusthiyatam, tenesasya vidhiyatam, apacitih kamye, matistyajyatam. So let's take these 2 lines. The first one says, Vedo nityamadhiyatam, which means this is one of the first steps in terms of the practice to get our awareness of self-realization. Studying the Vedas daily. Veda, as you might know, comes from the root word vid, to know. So it's a book of knowledge. There is the 3 parts to the Vedas. There's the Karma Kanda, which is the ritualistic portion. There's the Upasana Kanda, which essentially is talking about worshipping aspects, prayers, that essentially allows us to purify our mind. And the third aspect, or third part of the Vedas is the Jnana Kanda, which is essentially the Upanishads, or Vedanta, the end of the Vedas. So this is the knowledge portion. So Adi Shankara, the great sage, is mentioning that we need to study the Vedas on a regular basis. He says Vedo nityam. Nityam means on an everyday basis. In this case, adhiyatam. It is not just studying, it is chanting, then understanding, and then imbibing those teachings within our practice. So it is adhiyatam is a strong word to essentially mention all 3 aspects of these. Now, how to study the Vedas? Well, one can do is practicing the Gayatri Mantra, or reading one verse of Bhagavad Gita, like our Gurudev and Guruji have taught us to read one verse and understand the meaning of that verse, and imbibe the teachings of that verse in every day. Or for that matter, reading from the Bible, reading a passage from the Bible and understanding it and imbibing those teachings. Or of course, we can also do the watch the teachings of Guruji. There's so many videos available. You could watch those. These are all ways to practice the Vedas, or essentially study the Vedas, so that it starts to purify oneself in this process. The next one, it says taduditam karma svanusthiyatam. To practice the duties ordained by the Vedas. And it is not just practicing in an ordinary sense. It is anushthiyatam. It is to practice it to perfection. So you need to get towards that perfection, without any kind of a blemishes in the process. So what kind of duties do Vedas ordain? There are different things that the Vedas mention. One is nitya karma. They also, Vedas not only ordain about things that you should do, but also ordain things that you should not do. So the nitya karma are things that you do on a regular basis. For example, prayer, meditation, or chanting the mantras. Also, tending to the elderly, tending to plants, tending to nature, taking care of the nature, doing charity work, teaching, etc. So all of these things are all part of the nitya karma, things that you do on a everyday basis. Then there is the Nymethical Karma. Nymethical Karma refers to karmas or actions that we perform occasionally. For example, fasting. You may be fasting on the 11th day of the month, for example. So the fasting, or you may fast on particular, people fast on, the Thursdays or Saturdays and things like that. So you could be fasting. That's, occasional aspect that you do. It could be, going to pilgrimage places. So that's again occasional things. So things like that are done not on a regular basis, but on occasion. The third one, the Vedas mention that we have to take care of is the kamye karma. Basically, Vedas are not suggesting kamya means desires, the actions that we do out of our desires. Vedas, specify that, a kamya karma, things that you do out of your desire, is okay as long as it is not hurting anyone else, and also it is in accordance with the principles, with the righteousness principles. So, of course, later on, the verse talks about what you should do with those. But for now, kamya karma is to, do those actions that are desire-based, but to be careful about them, to make sure that these actions are not hurting anyone or are in accordance with the righteousness principles. That is, in other words, for example, things like, stealing, cheating, etc. That cannot be done, which is going to affect somebody. And that leads us to nishiddha karma. Nishiddha karma are the actions that you don't do, such as stealing or killing or adultery and so on and so forth. So that is the nishiddha karma. Then it also talks about prayaschitta karma. There are karmas that you could do in order to counter the negative effects of the particular karmas that you do, that you know about. So these are things that the Vedas talk about, the duties ordained by the Vedas. Then the next word is important also. So far this is about the practice, right? Now what do you do in this process of practice? It says, tenesasya vidhiyatam. Dedicate all the actions or duties as worship to the Lord. So we are not just performing duties, and Gurudev and Guruji have always mentioned that you watch each inhalation, exhalation. When you perform actions with that attention on the breath, essentially you're offering all that to God. And so the aspect or the effect of that particular action does not come to you or does not touch you. So watching the breath, watching our thoughts, and offering our negative, if negative thoughts come, offering negative thoughts to God, saying, God, I don't need this. All of these things are offerings that you do, but the most important thing is to watching the breath and every breath. So, and when you perform actions in that manner, you basically essentially have offered everything to God. Then the next teaching is that apacitih kamye matistyajyatam. So let the desire prompted activities be given up. So we talked about the previously kamye karma, So here we are talking about, Adi Shankaracharya is talking about giving up desire-based activities which lead to increasing ego. For example, we want to earn name or fame, and so we perform certain actions to do so. Those kind of activities which increases our ego, lessens our humility, are to be avoided. Instead, when such a desire comes, the Swamiji, Guruji has always mentioned that replace a lower desire with a higher desire. For example, if you were to think about food, think about, for yourself, think about providing that food to the suffering humanity. So a higher desire comes into your mind and you can act upon that. So this is basically maturing yourself from a ego-based desire to a selfless desire. The next two lines goes like this. Papaughah paridhuyatam bhavasukhe doso nusandhiyatam atmeccha vyavasiyatam nijagrhatturnam vinirgamyatam. So papaughah paridhuyatam. Let the multitude of sins be uprooted. Well, basically, what are these multitude of sins? Getting rid of the various likes and dislikes within us, anger, greed, jealousy, pride, etc. All of these various aspects that essentially hinder us in our progress towards God. Bhavasukhe dosha nusandhiyatam. Reflect upon the inherent limitation of worldly pleasures. Look at the worldly pleasures. Are they permanent pleasures? Are they giving you satisfaction in terms of your, for a long duration? Everything that we do, if you analyze that, essentially you will start to see that there could be momentary pleasures or pleasures that are, for a limited amount of time, but they don't last too long. And so essentially, when we fall for those pleasures, essentially we are not really getting to that ultimate reality. Now, Yoganji very beautifully explains why we have to go, into that God-realized state or self-realized state. He talks about, the analogy he beautifully gives is that imagine a person who has been essentially made to be not allowed to sleep for a very long time, let's say several days, right? This person has been forcibly kept awake, for this period of time. And let's say this person is now after a week or whatever time period is allowed to sleep. the pleasure of sleep that person gets. Yoganji mentions if you multiply that pleasure by billion times, it still does not describe the bliss that you get out of God realization. So that is why you strive towards God realization, because it is such a blissful state. And the wonderful thing is that as we practice in our meditation, our practices that we do, prayers, etc., we get glimpses of that bliss. And that glimpse of that bliss tells us, hey, there is more to come. There is still such a wonderful experience that you can get if you keep doing it and become one with that God realization, or become one with God. And so that keeps us going. And so God is very kind, he or she, however you see God, provides that ability to give us that glimpses so that we are encouraged to go further. So coming to this particular aspect, bhavasukhe dosha nusandhiyatam, reflect on what is the true source of happiness. When you realize that the happiness that you get out of the material aspects are impermanent, then you start to realize that we need to go towards the permanency of happiness. Swami Samarpananda was, I heard a lecture from him, and he beautifully explains what to do when desires come. He says 3 steps. He says, first of all, when a desire comes, you delay. Delay means don't act upon it immediately. You delay, and during the delay that you implement, you analyze that particular desire, if that makes sense, or if it is something that you should pursue. Then the second step is to deny. Once you have analyzed, that this particular desire is not something that's going to take you towards the ultimate happiness, then you deny that desire. And the third step is to destroy. So essentially, remove that thought itself from your being. So delay acting on the desire. Second step is to deny that desire, and finally to destroy or remove it from your being. It might take time. It may not be that desire goes away immediately, but the practice will help. If you keep practicing this aspect, eventually that will help. So it's a beautiful teaching from Swami Samarpananda. The next teaching is atmeccha vyavasiyatam. Anytime, entertain the desire for knowing the self. So anytime there is that desire that comes into your being, then practice it. Don't delay even there. Now the opposite, in this case, when that desire comes, you don't delay, you act upon it immediately. So if you feel like you want to meditate, and find a time, place where you can, meditate quietly, even for a short time, even if it's a few minutes, it's okay. So you can try to meditate at that point and inculcate that desire and essentially strengthen that desire. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad says, Atmanastu kamye sarvam priyam bhavati. Everything becomes dear to us because it's dear for the sake of the self itself. So when we start, just like the musk, the example of the musk deer cannot find the musk outside, within its pouch. So when we start to realize that it is not possible to get that happiness outside, externally. It is within us. Then we start to, go within and start to perform those actions that are required to get us more introverted, more deeper within ourselves to get into that God realized state. The last teaching in this particular verse is nijagrhatturnam vinirgamyatam. As soon as the desire for self-knowledge arises, leave the house quickly. Now, this is not leaving the house as in, for example, Lord Buddha did. He physically left the palace to seek God. In this case, what we are talking about is to leave the bondage. When it's a house, something that is binding you, leave the bondage quickly. So, in other words, there is a lot of different things that we are attached to. Start looking at these attachments and start to, distance from those attachments. It doesn't mean that you, for example, if you're attached to your child, it doesn't mean that you're giving up that child. It's basically you're loving the child, but now understanding that that child is a gift that God has given to you, and that you're basically, a caretaker of that child, and you're taking care of that child to essentially bring up that child according to its own, aspects. So these are things, these are the teachings from the first verse. I'm going to stop here because, there's still 4 more verses that we have to cover, but we can do it on that time. So let us, like Gurudev says, a little bit of practice is better than a ton of theories. So let us practice some meditation. So please sit straight. If you're sitting on a chair, that is still fine. Keep your legs apart a little bit so that you can bend at a later time when I'm instructing. Please sit straight, closing your eyes, concentrating deeply within. Remembering God. Whatever God means to you, remember that way. Watching each inhalation and exhalation. Going deeper within with your deep love for God. Observe each inhalation, exhalation. The inhalations and exhalations are going on naturally. You don't have to alter the breath, but just observe. Now take a slow, long, deep inhalation. And slowly bow down wherever you are to the extent you can. Just bring down as much as you can and exhale. Normal breath. Still watching the breath, concentrating within, remembering God. You can take a deep inhalation, holding the breath, slowly sit up. Exhale. Continue to watch each inhalation, exhalation. You can take another deep inhalation, holding the breath, slowly bow down. Exhale. Concentrating deeply within, remembering that. Offer your ego to God. More humility, more love. Again, take a deep inhalation, holding the breath, slowly sit up. Exhale. Now we'll take a few deep breaths. As we inhale, let's think of a particular positive quality, and exhale a negative quality. Slowly inhale love. Exhale desire. Inhale peace. Exhale anger. Inhale benevolence. Exhale greed. Inhale humility. Exhale ego. Inhale gratitude. Exhale jealousy. Inhale devotion. Exhale hatred. Again, inhale love. Exhale desire. Now calmly in meditation. Going deeper within. Forgetting about any thoughts, not to pursue any thoughts. Just observe it. Quieten the mind. If thoughts come, just don't pursue. Thank you. Come back to your inner self. Stay there. Watch the peace, calmness within. I'll conclude with a prayer. Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Let the blessings of God and Guru, their love, their protection, and their guidance be upon all of us. Amen. Amen. Thank you all. God bless you all. Jai Guru. Jai Guru.